thank you very much. It's an absolute honor to be here with you, and I'm sorry that I'm fighting a cold, so we'll be really, really lucky if we make it through this whole session without me having to cough, and so I'll try to turn the mic off if that happens. But it's a humbling experience for me to stand here because I remember being a student, and this was one of my favorite courses to come to is when we had guest lecturers that came and kind of shared their story. And some were obviously better than others because of the relevance to where I was at in my life. And so I want to try and tailor this as much as I can to making it pertinent to you and interesting to you as much as possible. So I'll try and share stories and examples that are just relative to my life that will bring that to fruition. I'll tell a little bit of the story, how we got started, and some of the challenges that we encountered and overcame, and some of the ones that we're still fighting today. But I want to, before I jump into things too much, I want to see if there is something in particular that you'd really love to hear about, and I'll make sure that we try to weave that in. Yes, Nate.
Some of the biggest failures or struggles that you had right before the lines, or even before that?
You bet. Biggest failures and struggles, yeah.
I'd like to learn more going on that is
What
what we learned from those failures.
did we learn from those failures? Great. Okay, there was another hand, yeah.
Did you choose the company that you started because you wanted to choose that one, or it was the easiest one available, or you saw the most opportunity?
Great question. That is absolutely something I'll talk about. Yeah.
How did you learn what you needed to know to be able to run your company successfully?
Great question. Okay, we'll try and weave that in.
What do you think was the key turning point in you going from just a normal, like, small business to becoming more of a major success story?
Great question. Okay, we'll see if we can't weave that one in. Yeah.
How much of your success would you credit towards schooling, or would you credit towards this experience?
Oh, that's a great one. As I was coming over here, I was really thinking, do I dare share this or not? You know, so yes, I will. I'll weave that in. Any other questions? Yeah.
It's a good way to get started on some entrepreneurship projects right now.
Oh, great one. Well, I'll share at least my slant towards that, something that you can do. If you have other questions, I want you to write them down. And what I'll try to do is at about 3:35, see if we can't have another slot to say, all right, what have we missed? What can we add to kind of finish out the last 15 minutes of the class? Here's the other thing, is if it gets boring at all over the course of the next time period, I need you to at least act like you're falling asleep, because there's nothing more offensive than someone falling asleep in your lecture, and so it will be a cue to me that this is boring, right? So you'll be my fake fall asleep if it gets boring, okay? Yeah. All right. Okay, so just a little bit of background. We started the business in 2000. I graduated from BYU in 2001. And so I was a junior. It was between the summer of my junior and senior year that the business was started. I was studying Russian and international law and diplomacy. The reason I was studying those two things is I didn't get into the Marriott school. And I was bummed about it, and my mission president had told me, study international diplomacy. So I thought, well, okay, you know, and so I did that. And I remember when I went to the international studies program, I don't know how many of you are involved in the international studies program. I had just been rejected from the Marriott school, and there was a group of us, and they said, now how many of you are here because you didn't get into the business school? And most of us raised our hands. They said, well, the good news is that 98% of our graduates have a job upon graduation. And I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. The bad news is that you need to start now trying to find that job. And so I was really paranoid and thinking from that point, what am I going to do? And so that lent itself to really kind of crafting a major or a degree that I enjoyed. So we could pick classes. We just had to run them by kind of an advisor to see if, hey, does this class work? And they'd say, we'll make a case for how it ties into diplomacy. And we really could make a case for just about any class. And so it was awesome. I loved it. And I'd served a mission in Russia. The Russian language was something that I was pursuing. And I thought, if this international relations thing works out, it's probably good to have, a Russian degree. Who knows how our relations will be with Russia? And, and so that's what happened. Well, I come home from an internship in Ukraine in that summer of 2000, and my brother-in-law says, hey, I've got this idea. I think it would be great if we bring business people together and connect them up. I thought, wow, that'd be wonderful. He goes, do you want a job? I said, sure. And so for $8 an hour, I worked for him as his do-anything kind of guy, which in essence was an overpaid slave is kind of how it played out, really. And we had our very first event in September, and there was 85 people at this event. And the people came together, and they all were different business people here in Utah County, and our goal was to help connect them up with each other. And the event was quasi-successful, and so we had another one, and we were about 2 months into the process, and I felt like I was working, 40, 45 hours a week because it was an entrepreneurial experience. And I was full-time finishing up my degree. And so that was probably, well, you know how it is carrying a full load. There are times when you feel like, wow, it's awesome. That tends to happen right after tests and projects. And then there's times you're getting ready and it's just crazy. And so I was trying to balance those two. My brother-in-law had dropped out of UVU after 2 years because he was a serial entrepreneur. And so the whole time we're going through this process, he's saying, Jeff, you just ought to drop out. You ought to drop out. And I'm like, I would be an idiot to drop out because I'm on scholarship, it's paid for, and I have 1 year left. And so he goes, oh, well, you're an idiot. I'd drop out because you won't need this Russian or anything down the road. Well, anyhow, I stuck it out and I finished up my degree, and it was absolutely unbelievably fulfilling to be done because I felt like instead of then having 2 jobs, I would just have 1. And so to answer that question of, was I glad I went to school or not? Absolutely, I'm glad I went to school. The biggest regret that I have, though, is I came to school to get a degree, not an education. And that was a major mistake. I was on scholarship, and so it was paid for. I'd worked hard to earn the scholarship, but if I could go back, I would care less about what grades I got and care more about what I learned from the experience. Anyhow, so 2 months into this whole experience with my brother-in-law, we're riding in the car, and I say to him, hey, can I work for equity? And he goes, well, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah, I really enjoy what we're doing. It'd be nice if I could, instead of making $8 an hour, if I could take it in stock. And he says, sure. So we kind of put together a calculation, and then for the next 2 years, I worked for equity. Now, that was an absolute gift because most people don't get an opportunity to fall in love with something and then work for equity. So for me, to go months on end with a job and never see a paycheck was one of those things that helped me identify that there's a passion inside of me. There's one other thing in life that I would have done probably for free if I could, or for equity, and that was play basketball. I loved to play ball, and I thought, wow, if I could get paid playing basketball, that'd be amazing. And now the only other thing that was like that was to connect people up, hosting events, and helping them build meaningful relationships. So that was a great gift. I don't know how many of you will have an opportunity in your life to work for hopefully a short but a long enough period of time to discover that you have a passion of some type. Because most people, through their life, work for money so that they can spend time on their passion. If you can ever find the opportunity to work for your passion and it happens to yield monetary success, to me that is the pinnacle. I feel incredibly fortunate that that's the situation I'm in. Now, that being the case, there are still days that are really, really hard, and days that you don't really fill up to it, but it's more like having 18 out of 20 days are awesome out of the working month as opposed to 5 out of 20 are awesome. And there was a gentleman early on in our business career that we met with. His name's Michael Colmer. I don't know how many of you know Michael Colmer. Michael, you know Michael? So Michael shared something with us that was incredibly profound. He was a consultant with us for a couple of months, and he had made a lot of money in 1996 to 2000. It was kind of the dot-com area, and he lived in Alpine, flew down to California he would leave on Sunday night, he'd come back on Saturday morning, and he did that for 4 years. At the end of his stint, and this is the reason it was the end of his stint, his wife said, either this is our last week or this is the last week of this arrangement because I can't do it anymore. And so he walked into the CEO's office and said, hey, I quit. And the CEO called him every name in the book. His coworkers on the executive team really let him have it as well. But he goes, I cared more about my family and my marriage than I cared about the stock options and the money that we were making. Well, the stock had split 4 times in the previous 18-month period. So his cash out, I don't know what his cash out amount was, but if I were to just maybe take a guess based on a few things, is that when he said he quit, he sold his stock interest that he had, and it was probably somewhere between $50 and $75 million. And they were like, oh, you're crazy. You're leaving so much on the table. 6 months later, the market tanks. And people call him, and they're like, how did you know? Why didn't you tell us? And he goes, I didn't know anything. I was saving my marriage. And that maybe leads to the second point that I would share with you, is that the most important business partner that you'll ever have in an entrepreneurial venture is your spouse or significant other. I recently saw a podcast or a webinar, I can't remember what it was, but the topic was finding a great co-founder. And they talked about how if you have an idea, you need to find a co-founder with different skill sets and ways of going about doing that. Fortunate for me, I lucked into an amazing relationship with the perfect co-founder of business and my wife. But I have had other business partners who the entrepreneurial experience has strained their relationship to such that it's led to divorce, or it's led to them having this crazy conflict of homework balance. Whether he or she wants to work a lot more than the understanding is, or they don't know how to strike a balance, because that is a major challenge. Because the one thing that will happen in an entrepreneurial experience is it will never sleep. You could work 24/7 and never get it done. And that's the biggest challenge, is you got to know when to say, all right, that's enough for today. I've got to have some balance. Because eventually, if you don't, you will burn out, or you'll burn up everybody around you, and you'll be flying solo in that experience. So for me, my wife was incredibly critical in the early days of our business. So when we got married, she had a hair salon. She did hair, and that's how come I could work for equity. As we kind of talked about, hey, there's this opportunity. How do you feel about it? And she says, yeah, let's go for it. I make enough to provide for us right now, and let's give it a shot. She had one stipulation. She says, when I have kids, though, I want to be able to stay home. So you've got a window of time to get things in place to where you can be a provider. And that was the only thing that she put out there that I needed to do. But I felt an important responsibility to be able to do that. So that communication with that most important relationship was really, really key in our success. Third thing that I would share with you is that as we got going, we had unbelievable expectations. We thought, boy, by year 3, we'll be all over the world. We'll be, year 5 or 7, we'll have private jets, and, we'll have it made. Well, we don't have any private jets. There's none in the foreseeable future. And we're not all over the country and a household name, and we've been doing it for 15 years. The one thing that was probably the biggest shocker to me was how much I didn't know, kind of coming into that. And this is where the advice that I would share with you that kind of ties into the education component, I wish I would have gotten an education rather than a degree, probably plays out, is what is something new that you are learning today? Now, that may be something that you learn from class. It may be something that you learn from, hanging out with some friends, and you're asking questions about what they're into. It may be something that you learn from a video game, but there's got to be something new and relevant that you learn every single day. The second thing is that new and relevant information that you're learning, what are you doing to innovate on it to make your life better and to make the lives around you better? The reason that I share that, and I'm going to cough, so hang on just a second here. I'm going to turn the mic off. Yes, there we go. Is that you will pay for an education one way or the other. You can pay for it by coming to this great institution, going all in, or you can pay for it in the real world. Which education do you think is more expensive? The real world is far more expensive. I'll tell you about a 2-year education that I just had that didn't happen at Stanford or Harvard. It happened in the real world. And it was, for me, my master's, my MBA. We opened up an office in San Diego, and we were trying some new things. We thought, man, we figured this out in Utah. Let's go ahead and do it in San Diego. Why'd we go to San Diego? Any of you from San Diego? How's the weather in San Diego? That's why we went to San Diego. That was the market research we did. We looked at it and we thought, it's a great place. And there's a lot of business people there. Great. There's more business people than there are in Utah. Yeah, let's go to San Diego. So we opened up an office in San Diego. We knew and estimated that it would take us about $1 million and approximately 3 years' time to be to where that office was producing cash flow positive. And it would be a major stake in the ground for us in securing our next stage of venture money to be able to kind of roll out across the country. Because if we did it in California, it would be different than having done it in Utah. So we went to San Diego and we opened an office. And in the so we had that initial $1 million we put in, and we burned through that in the first year, like we kind of expected to. And the next 2 years cost us $2 million. So total investment was $3 million. How much did we plan on? $1 million. Then we had a couple of other hiccups along the way that caused us to have to do some internal shifting from some other offices that happened to hit kind of at a time of a perfect storm that caused us to say, hey, we need to take a real hard look at our office in San Diego. We cannot put any more money into it. Now that it's almost, you've heard the saying, 3 feet from gold. You heard that saying? They were drilling, and they'd give up sometimes, and they found out that they were only 3 feet from gold. And so if they just would have kept drilling a little bit, we knew we were 3 feet from gold. But I said, we're selling the office anyway. And we sold the office for $1. So how much of that $2 million did we recoup, or that $3 million did we recoup? $1. So that MBA was a heck of a lot more expensive than an MBA from BYU, Stanford, Harvard, or any other institution combined, was the education that came. Now, if you were to ask me what was the most valuable lesson that I learned through that, and I could say there was probably 100. And that's the price of an education. So if you come to school for a degree, or if you come to school for an education, that education happens in your gut a little bit, and you can get that, from that standpoint. Anyhow, I'm gonna tie up just a few things, and then we'll go back into some questions, and I'll try and weave up in some other elements. One of the things that I would say to you, from a standpoint of why I love what I do, is I get to interact with people. And if you'll survey, I'm in the business where we have about 2,500 clients from different businesses. And I ask them, what's the favorite part of your job? 9 times out of 10, what do you think their answer is? What was it? The paycheck is never one of the 10. The people, 9 times out of 10 is what it is. Whether it's the people they're working with, the people they work for, or their clients they interact with. It's the people, 9 times out of 10. The 1 time out of 10, it's I love making a difference, or I love innovating, or something relative to product development. So for me, I am in the business of helping people connect with people. And so it's an incredibly fulfilling experience. It's also an incredible frustrating experience because people are wildly unpredictable, right? Engineering and all those different things, there's laws of physics that are at play. With people, there are laws and no one follows them, right? That's just kind of the uncertainty that happens in working with people. So every day is a new day, fully exciting and fun that way. We had been in the business about 4 years, and my wife got pregnant, and we had a baby. And I mentioned to you that there was the one clause, and that one clause was, hey, when I begin having children, the time for me to have my business is done. It's time for you to step up. So we sold her business and took that money and put it into Corporate Alliance and ran out of money. And so that began the time of when we needed to start to raise money from outside investors. And I remember a conversation that I had with my father. Now, my father is not a rich man. He never has been. He had happened upon a job overseas that paid him a little bit more. And so I was talking to him, and he was somewhat having an intervention with his son, and I was having a fundraising conversation at the same time, right? So he's like, son, what are you doing? You know, you've been 4 years in this thing. Your wife had this great business. You sold it. You had a nest egg for a down payment on a house, and you put it into the business. What are you doing? And I said, Dad, there have only been 2 other things in my life that I felt more sure about. My mission, I felt like I was called to God. I felt like I would stay there until I was done. And I said, and marrying my wife. I felt like it was the right decision, and I was all in. And I said, this is the only other time I felt that sure about something. And he looked at me, and he shook his head, and he's like, oh, man. Meaning, what? Like, how does he combat that? And I said, Dad, will you invest? And he put $50,000 in. Now, that was a bridge to some other things that kind of kept us going, which leads to the final point that I'll tie up here, and that is that you have to understand that you believe what you're doing is making a difference. Because if you don't, when the going gets tough, you'll quit. In some businesses, there's a time that comes when you have to quit and you have to throw in the towel. But if you don't identify what that time is up front, and to think back on, have you ever heard the saying, burn the ships? They burned the ships. Yes, no, yes. So when the pilgrims came over, they burned the ships so that they couldn't go back to England. They had to figure out how to make it work. That was the point in our business where we burned the ships and we had to make it work. So you need to decide if your business is such or your entrepreneurial experience is such that you want to burn the ships, or if you don't have the stomach for it, you understand, hey, it's a good time for me to get out and go to work for somebody else and be an entrepreneur where I'm innovating inside of another person's company. So with that, I'm going to come back to some questions. Some of them I may have touched on, some of them I may have not even grazed, and so this is a chance to kind of maybe field them a couple at a time and maybe kind of talk about that. So one of the questions was, what was the lessons that we've learned from the failures? So the biggest failure that we had in most recent times was thinking that we had our model nailed when we decided to scale, and realizing that we didn't have it nailed. Ryan Smith from Qualtrics, the CEO of Qualtrics, recently I heard it was at StartFest. I was there and he shared something and he said, it's much harder to nail it than it is to scale it. But it's far sexier to scale it than it is to nail it, right? You'll know you nailed it when you're having to pull the reins back on the scaling process, okay? For us, the sexiness of scaling is what drove us to being able to do it. So that was one of the things that I learned, is that we hadn't nailed it enough to scale it. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned of late. There was another question that I may have not addressed. Yes?
What did you base your idea for your company on?
Thank you. The concept was such that my brother-in-law was a serial entrepreneur. And in the 90s, you really cut your teeth in business, especially in this community, in sales, either selling security systems or dish and direct TV or cell phones or pest control. And his was cell phones. He had gotten into the cell phone business, opened up his own little dealership. And as he was growing that, he realized that most of his great clients came from relationships. And so he said, it'd be wonderful if there was a place I could go where I could build meaningful relationships really fast, because those meaningful relationships would turn into opportunities that are far more beneficial, enjoyable to work with, so on and so forth. And so that's how Corporate Alliance was born, was initially born out of the idea that we would help build the cell phone business. For me, it was an attractive, I grew up in a small town in eastern Utah, a small town called Altamont, and being from a small community, one of the things that was normal was you got to know all your neighbors. You knew people, and people seemed to naturally care for each other, because in small communities, that's something that you do, whereas in cities, it happens less. And so I was drawn to it because it was just an affinity to where I was from. Next question. Okay, while I wait for a question, I'm going to share something with you from a tip. One thing is at this university, we have a rich opportunity to start each class with a prayer. And who was it that gave the prayer? Thank you, by the way, for the prayer and for asking that I would be relaxed when I presented. That was quite kind. It's a great thing about this university is the opportunity to really kind of tap into some of the blessings that the gospel of Jesus Christ affords us. For me, a lot of the great insights in business were mixed with probably some of that prayer and ponder experience that you can have of receiving personal revelation and guidance and help and support. I'm a firm believer that the Lord loves his children, and he wants to give them experience, and he will guide them. I'm also a firm believer that growth comes from us making our own decisions and using our agency. So I don't think that the Lord will ever say, you must do this job, and I will show you the path all the way to the finish line, because we wouldn't grow if that was the case. One of the downsides of this university is the fact that most of us come from very, very similar backgrounds. And so the lack of diversity sometimes limits our thinking, sometimes limits our understanding, and limits our ability to stretch our minds. And so my question to you is, what are you doing to stretch in diversity? The second thing is that having spent some time down in Southern California in an office in San Diego and interacting with clients down there, they are far more proficient at building relationships quickly than are our clients in Utah. Do you have any idea why that might be the case? Take a guess. Yeah. They're used to a wider variety of people, absolutely. What else? Anything else? Bingo, you nailed it. They go to places where they don't know each other, happy hours, and they have to strike up a conversation. How many happy hours in the last 5 years have you been to? Right, none. Right? A lot of us grew up going to church dances, which was like girls over there and guys over here. And if we weren't forced to dance and interact, then there probably wouldn't have been any interaction. Thank heavens a lot of us get to go on missions and we're kind of forced out of our shell to talk to people. But that was about the gospel, because I would never get into sales because I hated to talk to people, right? How many of you have ever thought that? The power of being able to stimulate a conversation with someone that you have no idea who they are and where that opportunity will go, or you care, is something that we miss out on because we don't go to happy hours. So what are you going to do to develop that skill while having the great blessing of this university tied into the gospel of Jesus Christ? My question for you is, how many new connections are you making every single day? If it's less than one, you're putting yourself at a tremendous disadvantage. Because if you look around this room, in 15 to 20 years, this is the leaders of enterprise. And how many of them are going to be connected to you at that point? Could be all of them if you step out of your shell and introduce yourself each time and stay connected. It could be none if that's the case. So make sure you're doing something daily to have new connections, and then that you have some type of system to stay reconnected with them. Was there another question that you want, Nate?
So I was wondering, you said that you wish that you would have gone to school to focus on getting an education, not specifically a degree.
Yeah.
How would you recommend doing that? And then has your degree, specifically your degree, been beneficial in your, I guess, entrepreneurial pursuits?
Great question. So if I could go back in time and get an education as opposed to a degree, one of the most important things that I would have done was have clarity of goal where I wanted to achieve. And that would probably stem back to when I came to BYU, there was one thing that I knew for sure. I knew that I didn't want to be an engineer, because in high school I'd had an opportunity to go to Engineering State. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Engineering State. Any of you have been? Between our junior and senior year of high school, it was a week-long engineering program that I received a scholarship to because I was good at math. And my dad said, "Oh man, son, engineering's great. You go and get an undergrad in engineering, and then you get an MBA, and you'll be set." So I thought, okay. And so I went to Engineering State, and I thought, wow, there are people here that actually enjoy this. I can do the math, but I don't like it. And that was a great blessing to discover that really, really fast. So I came to BYU knowing one thing: I did not want to be an engineer. Outside of that, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I wanted to be rich because I wanted to have the opportunity to travel the world. And those are the only two things that I came to BYU really kind of thinking that I wanted. It's pretty short-sighted, but it's honest. After a year of doing generals, I go on my mission to Russia. And we're about 3/4 of the way through my mission. And I don't know if you've seen the movie The Saratov Approach. That was my mission. About 6 weeks before that actually happened, our mission president went home with a terminal illness and passed away 3 months after being home. So we were without a mission president in that period. Kidnapping happens. It all turns out great if you've seen the movie. And, sorry. It's still a great movie. So that happened in March. In May, I came home. 2 weeks before I came home, we got a new mission president. Mission president is a whirlwind tour of the mission. And me and my companion are the last missionaries that he stops to see. He gets there and he goes, Elder Rust, you're the last missionary for me to meet with, and I am exhausted, and you go home in 2 weeks. Can we just talk then? I said, absolutely, no problem. He goes, make sure that I tell you what you should do when you go back when we meet. And so I'm thinking, man, that's an answer to prayers, because I just wanted to be rich, and he's going to tell me how. And so we go, 2 weeks come, and I'm with the president, and there's like 8 of us going home at the same time, and I'm the last one to get interviewed, and I'm looking at the clock. I'm thinking, I'm not going to have any time. And all the missionaries are coming out of their meetings going, oh my gosh, that was unbelievable. He told me what I was supposed to do. It's so right. I'm like, I can't wait, I know. And so anyways, clock's ticking, and we get to that point. There's no time. And he comes out and he goes, Elder Rust, we got to get to the airport. And I heard you're a good missionary, so we'll just have to call this good. And I'm like, no, you were going to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And he goes, oh, okay, yeah. Come on into the office. Study international relations. That's it. Thanks. And I'm like, wow, that's a real believable story right there, you know. Thinking that stuff felt real inspired. And I came out of it just thinking, man, I lost out on my opportunity. So I came home thinking, I don't know if I really believe that. And so I tried to get into the business school because I thought business people are rich. So I get a business degree, and I didn't get in. So at that point, I thought I'll get the international relations degree. And to think back, when you don't have a vision of what you'd like to accomplish, it's hard to ever accomplish it. And so I would say to you, if you have no idea what you want to be, try and find a passion. And then build an education around that so you become an expert. That was, for me, I lucked into that because I lucked into the opportunity to do Corporate Alliance. So if I could go back in time, what I would do is, boy, if I were in a class like this, my goal would be that by the end of the semester, at least 80% of the people are somehow in my network, and I've figured out what they're trying to accomplish, and I'm trying to help them do it. Because that's inside of my hedgehog of what I do. If you're wanting to be, I don't know, I'll pick one of you. What are you wanting to do? Do you know?
Yeah, I want to do business finance.
You want to do business finance. Why?
Because I enjoy, well, actually probably I'm doing financial planning.
Okay, want to be a financial planner, okay? So once you know that, you want to become the best in the world, the most educated around that, and then start to create influence as well from a network standpoint. And so then you can set daily actions as to what you're going to do based on that. But for me, I lacked that vision of that. So what was your second question that you asked on that, Nate? Do you remember? How did my degree specifically help me? The one thing that it did help me was because I was so aimless in it, I could pick classes that I enjoyed. And some of the most enjoyable classes was a Russian geography class, which when in the world are we ever going to need Russian geography unless you're involved in Russian geography, you know what I mean, or the military. And now with Google Maps and Google Earth, right, like we don't even need the, like we passed with Google Earth our whole stuff in like, I don't know. It just is totally irrelevant now, you know. But the thing I learned is I learned how to think and process and analyze, and that's probably one of the great things that came from education. Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about how you guys tried to scale your company before you nailed the plan. How do you go about kind of redirecting after something like that?
It's a great question. It's something that we're in the process of right now. One of the things that we did is we took a good, strong look at our core and identifying what our core values were. And the one thing that we actually realized is when you're trying to scale too quickly, you oftentimes lose sight of your core, and you get away from the things that made you great. And so as we really started to analyze that, we thought, boy, I didn't realize how far I had strayed from that. So to think about, I'm a big BYU football fan. You know, when we're winning, it's like everything's great, right? We have no problems, everything's wonderful. You start to lose, and you really start to scrutinize and look at what the problems are. And when you start losing a lot, what happens is you have to go back to your basics. They go back to focusing on blocking and tackling. In business, you go back to identifying in your business, what's the blocking and tackling of your business? And so for us, that's what we did. You also have people inside your organization that you realize are not a fit for who you are in the core. And you've heard Collins, right people on the bus in the right seats. It's a real wonderful time to be able to cleanse those that are the wrong people and then to really figure out the right seats. In conclusion, I'm just going to show you a quick video here. This video is a video, see if it comes up. I'll just play it.
Exhibit 1, paper towel dispenser. The most pedestrian of adversaries, but play your cards wrong, try to cowboy it with some rookie one-hand maneuver, and the dispenser will have you crying uncle. The secret? You can't rush it. Take your time. Do it right. 2 hands, gentle as you please. The dispenser is your friend, not your enemy. You're the tortoise, not the hare. 2, 500,000 kilograms of an 11-star perforated solid APCP propellant cake for 124 seconds of burn and 29.4 thousand newtons of thrust, all to achieve one thing, escape velocity. Because when you're going to space, you don't just lift into the air like a bird, pretty as you please. No, you hold still. You hold tight onto the ground with everything you've got until the force builds with enough momentum to accelerate you beyond the clutches of gravity, and then you let go. The bow doesn't push the arrow forward until it first draws back to gain strength. Hold, release. 3, if you think going to space is hard, try relationships. An exact science they are not. The courtship process is like a baton pass. If you expect people to connect and it not end in comical disaster, then the parties involved must slow down. Get in a rhythm, take time, invest time, pay attention. Relationships are like baby birds. Don't rush the hatch. All that struggle gives it the strength to make it through life. Going faster gets you there slower, worse off or not at all. Be the tortoise, not the hare. All this seems so obvious, right? Now that I'm saying it, now that it's being pointed out to you in such a smug and self-assured fashion. But it can be so counterintuitive, can't it? The rest of the time. Focus can be so blinding. When you're rushing from thing to thing and stacking things on top of things because there aren't enough hours and there are too many things, when the things lose their shape and it's just a parade of things, and meaning is lost. When the only thing you're sure of is your foot is bearing down on that gas pedal and you can't afford to let it slack, those are the times that stepping away seems like the luxury of fools. But those are the times that someone needs to point out, you're still in first gear. Next time you think, white-knuckled and resolved, that you can't afford to slow down, remember that what you're saying is, I don't have time to shift out of first. Stop and think about it. That's utterly, epically insane. Don't be fooled by the sound of a racing engine. You need to accelerate the car, not what's under the hood. Don't multitask, don't skip lunch, don't email the guy sitting next to you when you can talk to him in his face. Don't take comfort in the false security of busy, and don't, not for a minute, kid yourself that you can do more alone than you could with allies. So take the time and make some. Push that clutch in, stop and tie your shoe, call a timeout and have a huddle. Let the dough rest, stop and switch trains, stop and take a walk, stop and slide your little caterpillar self into that cocoon and start making a butterfly. Breathe before you take the shot. Stop and start connecting. Stop and do it right. 2 hands, gentle as you please. The dispenser is your friend, not your enemy. You're the tortoise, not the hare.
So in conclusion, I would just say to you, make sure that you make some relationships while you're here at the university because it's filled with incredibly great people. And if all you leave with is a degree,